A Falklands veteran from Fareham has published a book about his experience as an 18-year-old in the conflict. Kevin Porter was a tactical radio operator serving in the Royal Navy aboard HMS Fearless, and his book gives us some personal insight into the war in the Falklands and the after effects. He's joining me in the studio to tell us more about it. Well, Kevin, thank you very much for joining us, and we were having a bit of a chat there before, saying that although it's not the longest conflict in comparison to things like the Second and the First World War, actually the effects when you come home are the bits maybe that people don't realise stick with you for quite a while.
Absolutely. It may not have been the longest conflict, but the intensity of the action that we saw really struck home. And on HMS Fearless, we were the amphibious landing control ship. We were in charge of the landings in San Carlos water, and from the moment of daylight on the 21st of May, we were virtually constantly under attack 4 or 5 times a day for at least 8 to 10 days. Aircraft waves of coming in, 16 aircraft at a time to attack us. It was quite intense. And then not just our part of the war, but when the troops eventually found their way ashore and had to march across the islands over some terrible, terrible terrain and then fight some intense battles with well-dug-in troops that weren't just conscripts. They were professional soldiers, and they'd been there for weeks. And yes, perhaps that demoralised them because the weather's atrocious. However, the fighting was very intense. And, you know, an example on Mount Longdon with the parachute regiment fighting, running up hills. There was 3 17-year-olds, or 2 17-year-olds, and an 18-year-old on just turned 18, were killed. And imagine those 3 boys running up a hill, because that's all they were, firing the machine guns, fighting to survive, and killing other people, you know, so they could survive. Sadly, they didn't. And it's those sort of things that stick with you forever. And watching your friends getting shot, you know, and having to deal with the aftermath of what's left, what's left, the blood and everything else that's lying around on the deck, having to hose all that down and clear it as if nothing had happened. And then you get back to normality of some sort after the war's over. And because of the intensity of it, you know, you don't settle. I certainly didn't settle for a very long time. And eventually, after 20 years of problems, I eventually sought help. My wife had been alongside me all that time. We met in December 1982, and she had always been there and put up with everything. And I eventually sought help for it, eventually got into the system with combat stress, and started to deal with the after effects for me. And I was diagnosed with subclinical PTSD, and then it was I say downgraded, but recognised as anxiety with depressive features caused by active service. And that made life more and more difficult for us. Even whilst I was getting the treatment and getting support with it, it still got difficult. So
I suppose it's one of those things that you don't ever really, you're not ever cured of it. You just learn to deal with it on a day-to-day basis a little bit better each time.
You do. You learn to manage it, and there are many more people out there. And it's not just the armed forces that are suffering with this, but there are many people out there with PTSD, and many are in a much worse state than I ever was. And since reading this book, people have come. You know, it's only been out for a week on Amazon. People have actually messaged me, Facebooked me to say how some of it is very painful, but it's helping. You know, it's helped them to understand that they're not on their own, and dealing with you know how you deal with it again is something else.
And I understand that as well as sort of reading the book and helping people, that way some of the proceeds from the book are going towards charity as well. Absolutely.
I was fortunate enough to go back down to the Falklands in 2007 on a pilgrimage with combat stress, and combat stress got me into the system to support me, and started my road to recovery. So 10% of every sale of the book is being contributed to combat stress. And yeah, so the more we sell, the more help we can give our veterans of today and the future, because war is always going to be there, unfortunately, and it's going to be fought one way or another, whether it's from a desert in Arizona or it's going to be hand-to-hand fighting. It's going to happen.
And it's interesting reading the book there as well, that obviously you were just 18. I mean, most other 18-year-olds are down the pub with their mates. Yeah. You were there on the deck of the ship. You were on the forefront of the conflict. I mean, What must you have been thinking when sort of last year it looked like it all might kick off again?
It's never worried me that it'd ever kick off again. But you know, just being up there all the time, you didn't. Whilst I talk about fear and being frightened on there, at the time you just deal with what you're dealing with, and you just have to deal with what you're dealing with, because if you don't, everything's going to fall to pieces. And we were a fantastic team on board that ship. Would it ever happen again? I don't think the Argentinians are in a position, just as probably controversially I might say, I don't believe our Royal Navy is in a position, especially without the carriers and the aircraft available, to actually defend it. But the Argentine Navy is pretty much shot, as is their Air Force. They haven't replenished their Air Force from when we destroyed it back in 1982, and destroy it we did.
And do you ever feel privileged or guilty, the fact that you came home?
I'm very privileged that I came home. There were times when I did feel guilty, and if you read the book, even on day one when I came, we had the street party in the welcome home at Millham. I felt really bad at times there, and you know, it had been tough, but we were lucky that we didn't get hit. Many of my friends on other ships who saw their own ships getting blown up. I watched ships exploding. I watched the Antelope blow up. I was standing on the bridge wing, not just over 500 yards away from it when it exploded, knowing that somebody had just died, and that stays with you. Do I feel guilty about it? I don't really feel guilty about it. I feel very privileged, one, that I was part of such a historical event, and we achieved what we achieved, and two, that I am here today to tell my story, and I have developed myself to be able to support other people.
Excellent. And talking of your story, obviously we've got the book here. I mean, just for the people at home, it's called Fearless, the diary of an 18-year-old at war in Falklands. And if people want to get hold of the book and read it for themselves, how do they go about doing that? The
book is on Amazon. It's live now. It's also on Kindle. And if you're interested in, want a signed copy, it's on Facebook. The Facebook page is Fearless, the diary of an 18-year-old at war in the Falklands.
Brilliant. Well, Kevin, it's a fantastic story, and we'd love to hear more. Unfortunately, we've run out of time on this show, but might have to read the book and find out more for myself. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your time, and please enjoy the book.